happier place to be, I'm sure.
I think it is. We think about Visual Studio as your development happy place.
Right.
And so I'm the director of development marketing, and so it's great to be back.
Well, Studio has been around a long time. I mean, the V6 that was still Studio.
It was Visual Studio 97. It was the very first version of Visual Studio 97.
Right.
What people don't know is the very first versions of Visual Studio that we shipped for Visual Studio 97, we actually took the individual boxes for VB, for Fox Pro, and C++, and we took the moral equivalent of saran wrap and wrapped it around the outside. And the first few, first probably 1,000 customers got the individual boxes with, the wrap around it.
Nice.
That was the Visual Studio 97 until we got the packaging done.
Well, yeah, that was the beginning of the whole bundling thing. I mean, Office did the same sort of thing. It used to be Word, Excel, and so forth, just pulling those things together. And I remember that original MDI interface was a challenge.
It was a challenge.
It was a very early product.
The very first, it was actually based on the C++ IDE.
Mm-hmm. And they took over. But I think this next version is Studio 10, right?
Visual Studio 2010.
2010.
That's right.
This is a big change too, a major revision to the whole infrastructure of doing Studio.
I think it's one of the biggest releases we've seen in a long time, especially on the Visual Studio team system front. It's probably, we think this is the biggest release since the first release, maybe even bigger. The work that's happening on Team Foundation Server, the work we're doing on the architecture tools. We won't talk about them in the keynote, but the Architecture Explorer enables developers and architects to interrogate an existing application and graphically represent what the application looks like in great detail. And so you can find all kinds of interesting dependencies and relationships. You can scope out how you want your architecture to be, and then how it actually exists, and kind of compare side by side. So we have, that's just one of the products. We have depth of changes. We're going to show today in the keynote a focus on test, Visual Studio team test, as well as development technologies, team developer. But even if you go below Visual Studio team system and down at the pro level, big changes there. We're going to show code-focused features, including code snippets and the ability to kind of very quickly write code. For those that don't like drag-and-drop style programming, like to be on the keyboard, we need to do more there, and so this release is pretty significant on that front.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Tim, I mean, you run a great development shop. I've met a lot of your team over the years, and they've been on the show and so forth. I imagine Studio 10 isn't in the office yet.
Is not?
No? Are you guys already using it?
Oh, of course.
Oh, you guys are great.
Yeah.
You have a reputation for being so far out front on some of this stuff.
Yeah, we're bleeding edge company, without a doubt.
Wow.
Yeah, so, but if you want me to answer Dave's question, I was just thinking as you're talking, I've been speaking at Connections since 1999.
Wow.
You know how I know that, like you, I'm sure you persist your PowerPoint decks.
Yes.
In folders.
Yeah, based on conferences.
Just as I was panicking, getting ready for these demos here, I'm putting files and folders back, and man, it's been a long time. It's been a good run. You know what, in all honesty, back then, it was relatively difficult to build software. We are so spoiled.
Oh yeah.
As .NET developers by tools. We are so spoiled by good tools, and Dave makes a great point. Dev 10, what do we call Dev 10? Visual Studio 2010 is a spoiler. There are some sweet features. Now, we're using some fragile versions tonight, so you never know what's going to happen on stage, but man, there's some great stuff.
I'm not surprised to hear the team system's going to be great, because I know this is really the third version of the team system, and Microsoft has this consistent pattern. This will be a great version of the product, but I think
perceived or not.
Perceived or not. Yeah. But it makes sense to me that you get the first version out there to get a feel for it, and then you get that initial feedback, and it's that next wave after that really things gel very tightly. Are there other big pieces inside of Studio we need to know about that this is a major rev to?
Oh, I think we don't talk about the framework all that much, but there's just some massive things going on in the framework.
So this is Framework 4.0?
The Framework 4, yeah.
Okay.
The Framework 4 has, if you weren't paying attention at the Mix conference last week, this tremendous amount of innovation that's happening from a platform perspective, especially for web developers.